Everybody here? We have all the management folks? All right. This is Tom Keen, guys, your EHS Esh, your EHS manager. I'm going to talk to you guys about recordability. A lot of questions about recordability, what makes it something work-related, non-work-related, how workers' comp plays into it, and I want to answer a lot of those questions for you. However, I do want to say it is Casual Friday, and that's why I'm rocking out what I'm rocking out. Dude, what are you talking about? It's not Friday. What? It's not Friday? What day is it then? It's Wednesday. No, I remember going out for Thirsty Thursday last night, and that means it's Friday. No, you and I went out for a beer last night, and as I was leaving, you said something you wanted to stay out for Trash Tuesdays. Remember? No, of course I don't remember that. It's Trash Tuesday. OMG, Tom. Do you have a special drinking name for every day of the week? I don't really know. I never thought about it. Let's see. Messed up Mondays, Trash Tuesdays, Wasted Wednesdays, Thirsty Thursdays, Forget You Fridays, Smash Saturdays, and Sloppy Sundays. I have a problem, don't I? Here's the card for our EAP plan. Why don't you call that? Thank you. I will file this appropriately. Thank God I didn't tell you about Blackout Black Fridays, am I right? Is that even a thing? Yeah, kind of like Christmas too. You buy all this stuff and then you forget about it, and then the next day you get to unwrap it and figure out what you bought. Except for you got a hangover. So I guess it's exactly like Christmas. Seek help. All right, I guess I will use this. Enough about me, though. Let's talk about recordability. Now, before we get into some of the tips to how to get out of recordable injuries, let's talk to you about a few different things. A couple of caveats. One, question is, who is signing the OSHA log? Now, there's some cases where the EHS person signs it, some cases where the plant manager signs it, and some cases where somebody else. But it really should be very similar. However, what I try to do as an EHS manager is educate that plant manager, if they're the one signing it, on all of the pieces of recordability and what this all entails, and furthermore, what the repercussions are for taking a recordable or not taking a recordable. Because there can be consequences with having this thing filled out incorrectly. Also, it depends on what your business says. So some of the larger organizations that have a lot more rigor and very strict on recordability, basically if it's anything that touches it, smells like it, kind of seems like a recordable, you're automatically taking it. Now for some of the smaller organizations, they don't have as much rigor and they do have a little more leeway into figuring out what recordability is, and for certain particular cases, as well as what is non-work related versus work related. Listen, at the end of the day, you do have the ability to play in the gray here, but there are consequences. OSHA could come in here, inspect your OSHA log, and do investigations with the employees, ask them questions, and they start seeing you're falsifying documentation, or even kind of seems like you're falsifying documentation, you could be in a lot of trouble real quick. So it is important to get this right. You can play in the gray a little bit here, but it's really dependent upon how comfortable you are with that and how much risk you want to take on for potentially having OSHA come in and tell you you're wrong and getting a notice of violation. Some people say it's really black and white, cut and dry. That's fine. But I've worked in this industry for over 20 years. I've talked to many EHS professionals out there, talked to many different consultants, many different EHS lawyers out there. There is a little bit of gray involved, and all of the tips I'm going to tell you about are ones I have potentially used or had heard other people use in the past. So these ones are not necessarily ironclad, but they are ones I want to describe to you so that way you could potentially use them in certain cases. Because I like to play in the gray a little bit, but it's also something I want to make sure I am right about this. Play in the gray, just like the older men that New Girl in Quality likes to date. Am I right? Ha! Fantastic burn. Wait, she does? Like, how much older? Wait, aren't you married? A boy can dream, can he? There's nothing wrong with keeping somebody on deck. One thing I can say is it has gotten a little bit more dicey and a little bit more difficult in the past 15, 20 years, mostly because workers' comp kind of plays into this. Now, those are two separate things, recordability and workers' comp. You can have a compensable claim and something that is not recordable, and you could have vice versa, right? They're not always the same, but they're pretty close. So it does help you determine whether something is recordable or not, whether workers' comp says it's workers' comp compensable or not. However, over the years, insurance, personal insurance, the health insurance that we give to employees has really gotten reduced to a point where in some cases, it's not providing nearly as much cost benefit for employees, and really they don't care whether it's recordable or not nearly as much as they care about who pays for it. So as far as they're concerned, I think many years in the past, they would have their health insurance pay for it because health insurance basically paid for everything, right? Nowadays, there's a lot of copay, there's a lot of deductible you have to do. So as far as they're concerned, if it is a work-related case or even something that could be a work-related case, in many cases, they're going to claim it as a work-related case. And I'm not going to go into the details of individual people and what they do there. We will talk a little bit about that when we go through the tips. I'm just saying it has gotten worse and something that has become more of an issue over the years when we talk about recordability and whether something is work-related or not. The last thing I want to say before we get into the actual tips themselves, you need to treat this almost like a court case, right? There's rarely ever one thing that says, yep, it's recordable or not. In many of these cases, I'm building kind of a small little case, and sometimes I bubble it up to workers' comp to help me determine whether it's a workers' comp work-related case, or in some cases, I'm using that to see whether it is recordable or not. But again, it's a lot of extra data I am putting in there to make sure that these things are ironclad from my perspective, that I feel really good about signing an OSHA log or a plant manager signing an OSHA log, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm his advocate to ensure that these things really are right. So I'm going to make this kind of like a tier list, basically from worst tip to best tip, right? The ones that are most ironclad and the best ones are going to be your gold tier at the end, but the other ones that are just kind of supporting evidence are going to be first. So it's kind of like Thanos getting the Infinity Stones, am I right? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm a young kid. I don't know. For you, it's like getting all the Pokemon cards. Gotta catch them all. Well, what about me? I'm an old guy. What do you got here? For you? Like Captain Kirk getting all the women in Star Trek. Kirk. Classic. And the last one, this is really the most important caveat. Listen, I understand we all have metrics that we're trying to abide by and trying to improve every year. But if you're spending hours and hours and hours of figuring out whether something is recordable or not, just because you want your metric to look good, and you spend like, I don't know, 10 minutes or sometimes 0 fixing the problem, your emphasis is in the wrong spot. Listen, we are here to reduce injuries, not necessarily to reduce recordables. Now, don't get me wrong, they should both be the same thing. We should be driving them both down. But if you're spending hours and hours and hours of doing investigation whether something is recordable or not, and then we don't do anything to fix the problem, again, your focus is in the wrong spot, and I would question ethically and morally how we as a company are performing. So tip number 1, and I always have to start with this one. Understand the recordability rules. Understand what OSHA says is work-related, what isn't work-related, what industries have to keep an OSHA log and what industries don't, because there are potentials there where you do and don't have to keep OSHA logs. But also, I'm learning things every single day. I've worked in this industry for 20 years, and for a lot of big companies, for a lot of small companies, and yet still I am educated occasionally on things that are recordable or not. I had one instance where I had an employee who was working with me. He was a very well-seasoned DHS employee as well, and he was dumbfounded when he heard that oxygen, giving somebody oxygen from a work-related case, is a recordable. Right? He didn't know that, and that's something I only knew because I had gone through that a few years prior. Another good case I can bring up to you is not too long ago. Somebody asked me a question about whether a infection somebody had, if they spread it at work, would be considered work-related or not. And so I spouted off something about the exception rule there is in the OSHA guidance documents where it says if you have something like cold or flu viruses that are given from one employee to another, it's not considered OSHA recordable. So I said, well, yeah, it's very similar to that. However, if you ever actually look at that rule itself, it says it only really applies to cold and flu, right? Common cold and flu. Anything else beyond that would be considered potentially a recordable or work-related case. So again, even I, after 20 years of working in this industry, still can be educated. So all I can tell you is knowing the OSHA rules are imperative. Knowing the OSHA recordability is imperative to understanding whether you're going to have to take something on the log or not. The unfortunate part is these rules are pretty ironclad, and most of your injuries are going to be pretty cut and dry, right? So if somebody at work, when they're on the clock, gets stitches, basically just have to take that one, put it on the log, whatever the corrective actions are. However, like I said before, you do have to treat this like a court case. You have 7 days, and OSHA says you have 7 days to put something on the log. So between when an injury happens and that 7 days later, if it's not something that's very cut and dry, I am using those days to ensure that we really need to put it on the log. What I don't want to do is put everything on the log right away necessarily, especially if these kind of iffy cases and ergonomic type cases. Those will be the biggest ones we'll talk through some of these tips on. But I want to make sure that it is recordable because I don't want to redline 58 things just because I'm figuring out afterwards they weren't really work-related cases, right? So I have 7 days to put them on the log. And after that 7 days, I want to make sure that they're there. Again, most of the time I'm putting it right on the log right away because it's pretty cut and dry, but some weird, different oddball cases that come up, those ones I kind of go through this as, like I said before, a court case to ensure we have enough information, documentation to say, yep, it really is recordable or does not.